Okay, so today, guys, I will be taking the Politiscales test. I do not have any problem if other official languages are added or replaced the already existing official language in my country. Well, I strongly disagree with that because language is like one of the most essential things when it comes to culture, and community um, and what community you're a part of. And although language always changes and it's a fluid process, for example, Norwegian language today is very very different from Norwegian language let's say 500 or 1,000 years ago. They're almost so different that they can be considered entirely different languages. Um, it's still important to keep with those cultural roots, and what I care about when it comes to language is really like an organic change when it comes to language, because then you can always see essentially traces of the past in the language. So some examples of that in Norwegian language, I am Norwegian, is things like, for example, Wednesday we call onsdag, which is like Odin's day. Thursday is torsdag, which is Thursday, and so on and so forth. So you have a lot of different pagan inspiration in our days, and so like you can see that reflection in of the past being reflected in our language. If the Norwegian language was replaced by English, for example, I think that is very problematic, because then you don't really have that organic flow of culture, which I think is extremely important. So I absolutely disagree with this. Environmental norms should be influenced by mass consumption and not from an authority. Yeah, I think that it's generally a good policy, that people vote with their dollar. I think that for a lot of these environmental questions, what you really need is kind of international legislation, because what happens when you have, for example, stricter restrictions regarding environmental norms in your country is that a lot of those businesses will just flee the country, and they will move to a country where there is less regulation. And so I think that it's extremely important that this is something that's kind of figured out internationally, and we as consumers can absolutely push environmentalism in the right and desirable direction. Um, so I guess I would say I somewhat agree. You might need some government regulation, but I would not want any government regulation if, let's say, it's only my country that has that regulation and no other countries, because um, businesses will just flee the country ultimately. Technological progress must not change society too quickly. Um, oh, I think I think that is tough. Well, I think that when you have technological progress in society, that is bound to change society to some extent. So a great example of that is like the television, right? Or the radio. Like before these things, people weren't necessarily huddled around the news or forms of media the same way as people were before these inventions. People might just talk to each other, um, and be in each other's company. So, and now we have whole kind of traditions around like TV and radio and all of these different things. Like in my country and in many other countries, for example, we will have certain TV traditions for what movies we watch. In during Christmas and during the festive seasons and so on and so forth, or our National Day of Independence. And so, like, technology is bound to change society, regardless, I think, of how fast or how slowly it is. Essentially allowed to leap into the society. Like the TV, no matter if that was introduced, when it was introduced, or when it was if it was introduced, let's say 50 years later, would still ultimately have the same impact on society by and large. What I think, however, is it is a big problem if you let technology such as automation, for example, take too big apart, because you can ruin the entire social fabric of society by allowing that change to happen too fast. So I can give an example, right? So if we kind of live in this post-scarcity society, I think that the way that we have traditionally found, for example, our significant others or found our friends and so on and so forth, has been through the things that we've done, through our work, through our communities. And if there's no real need for work anymore, yeah, I think that there's a very serious possibility of that kind of undermining the entire social fabric of society and how we socialize with other people. I think if people didn't have to go to work, many people would probably just stay inside and play video games or watch streams or something. I don't think that is very healthy for humans. I think we need contact with other humans and talk to other people face to face. And so, if you have something that like changes, how society has always been, I think that is very dangerous. So in terms of AI, for example, yeah, I would absolutely agree that you can't let that technology just leap out and not be regulated, because it can undermine the whole society. So I guess if that is what we're talking about, I guess I will say I absolutely agree. Is it legitimate for a country to intervene militarily to defend its economic interests? So, I kind of subscribe to the thought of like realpolitik, and um, I wouldn't like to see that countries intervene militarily on the basis of their economic interest, but countries have been doing that in society for a long time, for basically all of history. They have intervened militarily based on their economic interests. I think a lot of the international legal framework that exists today is only enforced when it's beneficial for those in power. So, for example, the United States. The United States signed, for example, the torture convention, like the convention against torture and inhumane treatment of others, but still committed Guantanamo Bay. And although the U.S. would criticize, for example, someone if they were to if they were to invade a country for their economic interest. The U.S. have been invading countries for their economic interest a very, very long time. That's one of the reasons why the U.S. went into Iraq. That's why the U.S. intervened in a lot of elections in South America, so that the U.S. banana plantations and fruit plantations there would stay safe. And so I think that that is absolutely something that happens in realpolitik, that countries intervene militarily to defend their economic interests. Of course, I don't think that this should happen, but it is something that has happened through history all the time. So I will say I rather disagree with that. Give me just one moment. Let's see. Okay. Transhumanism will be beneficial because it will allow us to improve our capacities. Well, I think that it can be. I think that a problem with transhumanism and like these forms of development is that it reduces essentially the natural selection pressure in society. So, for example, let's say that you have this computer chip, right? That you can implement into someone, and it makes them really good at mathematics. Now there's no real natural need for the ability to be good at mathematics or process mathematics. And so over time, what you will see is probably that there's no real natural selection for that form of ability, and that ability will decline in humans over time. Like that is also something that we've seen in society. I believe in the last 10,000 years or so, the human brain on average have shrunk with about 10%, and that is because when you have a society, you have a certain level of a social safety net. And when you have a social safety net, that enables more people to survive and reproduce. And many of these people might not necessarily have traits that are desirable. So I would say that I'm in favor of transhumanism, but only if we can preserve our humanity and our innate ability in that process. I would not like us to wind up like the movie Idiocracy, which is the Mike Judge movie, where everyone is stupid over time or innately stupid because essentially that's what's been naturally selected for. I think very much it is desirable to have a human ability in a society. Yeah. So capabilities. So I guess I will say I somewhat agree. Depends on how it's done. Mass strike is a good way to acquire new rights. I think I absolutely agree with that. Unions have proven to increase wages among workers significantly over time. And so, the only way a union really can threaten an employer is to do a strike so that they have a lack for labor. And so I absolutely think that mass strikes is a good way for laborers to acquire new rights. It's necessary to move regulations in labor legislation to encourage firms to hire. Well, if it was easier to fire people and you had less labor protection laws, then it would be easier for firms to hire. Um, like if I can, for example, hire you for a day, or I can do like a trial period, then there's far more risk to me hiring you if there's very strong labor protection laws, meaning it's very difficult for me as an employer to fire you after you've been hired, then I would be very hesitant to hire new people unless I am guaranteed that they're of a certain level of quality. So when you have less regulation, it is beneficial in a sense because it allows for easier access to the labor market, and people that doesn't necessarily have acquired a resume or a huge level of skill can easily get that entry position job, because employers um, can afford to take the risk because it's easy for them to fire people. Um, but at the same time, I do believe that there should be, you know, certain labor protections. I don't think that a firm should be able to fire someone like willy nilly. So I very much think that it's like a balance. You don't want labor legislation to be so strict that it stops employers from hiring, but at the same time, um, you want people to have a certain level of security in their job. And if people have no security in their job, then it's also way easier for them to it's also way easier for them to be fired without cause and so on and so forth, um, right? Which is really not, I think, the outcomes that you want. Um, so I guess I will put rather disagree on this one. Looking for one's own profit is healthy for the economy. Well, I think that um, I think that you hardly have anything produced at all without people looking for their own profit. Um, it's probably desirable for people to do so. Um, hmm. Like you have the Laffer curve, for example, which is a principle in economics where essentially if you tax people to a certain extent over 50% or something, I think, then they are far more likely to start tax evading. So when people see a lesser return of their labors and their efforts, they're far more likely to cheat the state. And so, if you want an efficient state where people work for the interests of society and the interests of themselves, really, you want a state where it's beneficial to start businesses, and it's easiest to start businesses and gain profits. So I guess I will place, say, absolutely agree. Let's see. I will just check something. Uh, Stop. Stop. Okay. GMOs should be forbidden outside research and medical purposes. Let's see. GMO. Genetical modified organism. Okay. Well, I don't really have a problem with genetical modified organisms. I guess that depends on what we're talking about, but I think that that is an important process to essentially lead us to a place where medicine is more accessible and so on and so forth. GMOs should be forbidden outside of research and medical purposes. Like, where is GMOs made though outside of research and medical purposes? I guess I agree with that then. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, no, it should definitely be regulated. You shouldn't be able to do it willy nilly without cause. But like research and medical purposes, like isn't that kind of all encompassing for what you would use GMOs for, or what anyone would use GMOs for? So yeah, no, I guess I agree. Multiculturalism is a threat to our society. Well, I do believe that it's the case that essentially the more multicultural your society is, the more conflict there will be within that society. I don't think that there is such a thing as a multicultural society without conflict for like all of human history, more or less. Um, many people point to the U.S. as like this beacon of like where multiculturalism is great, and like multiculturalism has its benefits. Like for example, you can rely on a larger labor pool because you have access to more labor for many different cultures, but it also creates conflicts of identity, right? Where you have several different groups that don't necessarily align with one another in terms of their identity. And when people don't align with each other in terms of their identity, they're far less likely to cooperate and far more likely to do things like tax evasion, for example. Like, I think that my country, Norway, has like a shadow economy of 4 or 6%, whilst you have countries like South Africa, for example, which of course is way more multicultural, and have far more different classes, have a shadow economy of like 35%, which is now like an immense amount of the wealth in the country that essentially the government can't access. And when the government can't really access wealth, or the citizens of a country makes it hard for the government to access the wealth of the country, then it's very hard to do have social welfare programs, which I support, like for example universal healthcare or universal. It is, I think, important to have unified society in order to have social programs within society. So I will click absolutely agree to that. The fact that some schools and universities are private is not a problem. I'm kind of torn on this one because I do think it's problematic. Just like I think it's problematic if you have several cultures within a society. I think that it's problematic if you have several classes in the society, and you don't have socialization between the different economic classes. So, for example, if private school leads to that all the rich people send their kids to one school, and all the middle class people send their kids to one school, and all the poor people send their kids to one school. I would not be in favor of that, because that just creates more class division, and it creates more social division within society, where you now have completely different groups that don't really socialize with one another. And so I think it's desirable that you have people from all kinds of different creeds in society going to the same school. I went to public school for both my primary school, my middle school, and my high school. And for my middle school, like in Norway, it has traditionally been the case that the rich people, the middle class people, the poor people all go to the same school. They go to the school that's closest to them. Um, and so I went to school with like the sons of like multi-millionaires. Being a fairly middle class guy myself, and we all got along great. Um, and so, I don't think that type of stratification where you segregate people on the basis of their economic class is desirable in society. Um, at the same time, I'm not entirely opposed to like school choice. And for example, some parents might have certain values. For example, let's say Christian values or something, and so they don't want to send their sons and daughters to like a public school that might be more secular, right? Which I also have understanding for, but I guess I believe ultimately that social fabric that holds everyone together is more important than like free school choice. Um, so I guess I rather disagree with this one. It depends really to which extent. That's what I have to say about that. It's necessary to avoid private monopoly. Yes, I absolutely agree with that. When you have a monopoly in a market, what usually happens is that they will do price gouging, right? This is true for many different monopolies. For example, you have the Bears Box Corporation that has virtually a monopoly on diamonds, which is the reason why diamonds are as expensive as they are, or the maple syrup monopoly in Canada. So there's many examples of this where monopolies leads to worse prices for the consumer. Um, I do, however, think that big business is desirable. So in Norway, 100 years ago, when you had this small mom and pop shops, um, you might have 100 wares, 100 different products in a store, or 200 or 300 different products in a store. Today, the average Norwegian store has between 3,000 and 5,000 products. And they're way cheaper too, because bigger corporations have more negotiating power, and they can afford larger distribution chains, which means that they can also acquire more exotic product. So what I think is desirable in terms of the economy is really an oligopoly, where you have some few big actors in a market. And But if those actors in that market starts to become too big, I think in Norway, if a corporation owns more than 30% of the market, then it's split up, into smaller companies. So no company can own more than 30% of the market share. And that way you get competition between some big actors, which I think is desirable. Of course, there's also cases where, for example, these big oligopolies, these big businesses, they work together to essentially create a monopoly and to inflate the prices. Um, and then we have government regulation that makes it so that the government can step in and make these companies pay hefty fines. One of the examples of this in my country were between a company called Very Sure. So these are security companies for home insurance. And one of them is called Very Sure, and the other one is called Sector Alarm. And I worked for Sector Alarm for a while, and we were told very deliberately that, oh, you don't go to the houses that have the Very Sure stamp on them, or that are customers of Very Sure, which is like. Then there's clearly not competition in the market, because if there's competition in the market, you should be able to sell to anyone. Um, I guess I went on a bit of a tangent here, but I guess I agree that it's necessary to avoid private monopoly, but big business can also be good. So I would say I absolutely agree. Wage labor is a form of theft from the workers by companies. Um, I I disagree with that. So, for example, a business owner will take substantial risk in starting a company, and many of the business owners, when they first start out, they might work 16 hours a day or more, and so they work really hard, and like most new businesses, they end up losing money, I think, on average for the first 4 years. And so it's a tremendous investment of time, tremendous investment of money, and personal risk that goes into a business venture. And I don't think that under a communist system, like a system where essentially you have cooperatives, you have worker cooperatives, everything is a worker cooperative. It's easy to start a new business, because you need people with capital and resources to start a new business. Like it's expensive, and I generally speaking believe that groups are more risk averse than individuals, meaning that individuals are far more willing to take risk than groups. And so um, I believe that this type of worker cooperatives, where the work is owned by the worker, is inefficient for that reason. I had a acquaintance of mine that is a communist tell me that for example, worker cooperatives are more productive than uh, private business, and that might very well be true. But I also think that worker cooperatives, because everyone in the worker cooperative is out for their own interests, right? They all benefit from what they are producing, and so they will be more averse, more reluctant to hire, essentially. Um, to which she said that, well, I believe that we need regulation to fix that, right? So that they're forced to hire when necessary, but then you will probably just encourage these worker cooperatives to be less productive, because, like, for example, if you cap the amount of money someone can earn in a worker cooperative, why would anyone work? Why would that worker cooperative ever be incentivized to work beyond that limit, right? For example, let's say that you can produce steel for $20,000 per individual or something a year. Why would any worker cooperative be incentivized to work beyond that limit of 20,000 per year per worker? And there's also not really an incentive in that case to hire new workers, because that doesn't lead to more profits for you, because it's not like you can go above that $20,000 mark. And so I absolutely disagree with that. Sexual orientation is a social construct. Well, I know that there's been found all kinds of material things about sexual orientation. So, for example, for someone that is homosexual, it's more likely that they are like a homosexual man. It's far more likely that they will be born late, so they will be one of the younger siblings. And I also know that there's certain like hormonal effects that can essentially cause someone in the womb that can make it more likely that someone becomes homosexual. So what I believe, I guess, is that there might be genetical factors that make someone more malleable towards certain sexualities. Um, hmm. But at the same time, I do think that sexual behavior can be socially enforced. So, for example, I know that this may not be sexual depending on who you ask, but when it comes to trans women or trans people, like autistic people with autism are like 6 times more likely to be trans. And I think that it is because if you are kind of socially isolated or socially ostracized, and you don't easily fit in with other people, then you might go to either some type of political niche, or you could go to some type of sexual niche. And I actually have known a great many psychologists that essentially say that like there's individuals that they've known that's pretty much done anything like sexually or otherwise to be in social contact with someone. And so I think that there's definitely like a social element there where someone can be coerced to be more be of a certain sexual persuasion. Yeah, so it's it's a tough one. At the same time, like as I said, I believe that it could be that someone are more malleable to changing sexuality. For example, I know that women tend to be more sexually malleable than men. So, for example, there was an experiment where they showed men gay porn, and they showed women lesbian porn, and the men were generally speaking disgusted by the gay porn, while the women generally speaking were aroused by the lesbian porn. And so it seems to me that women are far more sexually malleable than men, which is also kind of weird because men are typically more sexually extreme. like if you look at people with fetishes or whatever, like most of them are men, usually. Um, so, um, I guess I will say, I guess I will somewhat agree. You also, of course, have cases like with homosexuality where you're monozygotic twins, which means genetically um, identical twins, where one is gay and the other one isn't, right? Which proves to me that there has to be, an environmental factor there, unless it is maybe epigenetic. So I guess I will somewhat agree. Changing the system radically is counterproductive. We should rather transform it progressively. I guess it depends on what you want to achieve, right? Um, like for some changes, you can probably not just amend the constitution. For example, if you want a completely different electoral system, um, maybe you actually have to have a revolution or something in order to see that true. Um, However, I do not believe that it is desirable to go away from our constitution and our principles to such extent that you completely destroy the system. So I would say that that we should absolutely transform it progressively. We must fight against global warming. Global warming is one of the issues that I do not really have a very strong opinion about. As I said earlier regarding the other environmental question, um, I think that like these issues are very much things that have to be solved internationally. Like if my country, for example, passes regulation regarding, what type of how much carbon businesses or industries can let out into the atmosphere, what ultimately happens is that that business closes down in my country, and then it opens up in another country that has less regulation. And so, what has happened when, for example, Norway has had tougher climate regulation is that those businesses have fled to overseas, to China, for example, where there's almost no regulation at all. And this actually increases the carbon footprint because now not only are you producing it in a country that is almost don't have any regulation at all, but you also have to ship it around the globe, right? So this actually increases the carbon footprint. So I am very against climate regulation in my country. At least I'm against it. That my country is to have stricter climate regulation than anywhere else because I think it just hurts business and industry. Um, so I will say I rather disagree on this. It's better to arrest someone potentially dangerous preemptively than rather than taking the risk of having them committing a crime. Um, no, like I believe in the principle of guilty, innocent until proven guilty, and so there has to be due process. You can't just arrest people willy nilly. You have to have some amount of proof. Of course, like if you have chat logs um, of someone that poses might pose a security threat, like let's say you have the NSA or someone monitoring someone's conversation and someone talks about shooting up a school, maybe it's best that we have someone talk to this individual, a counselor or something. Um, and so if there is someone that has proven to be a security threat, then I would absolutely say that it's better to arrest them preemptively, rather than risk them having committed a crime. So I will say rather disagree to that one. Foreigners enrich our culture. Um, well, uh, so for example, if I think about like many of the foreigners that come to my country from Somalia or Pakistan, for example, they have a completely different um, culture that is not necessarily compatible with the Norwegian culture, and so I don't really think it's like they enrich our culture. It's not like an extension of our culture or a building upon the Norwegian culture in our society. It is um, it is completely different culture and a completely different way of viewing life. And so I would say maybe it enriches, you could say that it enriches the culture of the country to some extent, because now you have access to food, and you have access to many things that you might not have otherwise. Like you might have now access to like authentic kebabs or something from from Turkey. But that's not really a part of our culture. That is a completely different culture. So I will have to say I rather disagree to that one. It is necessary to massively invest in research to improve productivity. I think that research can absolutely improve productivity. Um, I don't really know if I have much more to say about that one. So I guess I will just agree. The labor market enslaves workers. No. Um, like, this goes back to what I said earlier as well about um, like how essentially you can't really produce anything or make business without having capitalists that have the possibility to invest and create that work in the first place. It's far harder for individuals to acquire resources and take risk in a form of communist economy. Um, this goes also back to worker cooperatives. These groups of people are not as likely to take the risk. Like groups are much more risk averse than individuals. Do I believe that certain workers in certain lines of work should be better compensated for their work? Absolutely. I wish that they were better compensated for their work. Um, but at the same time, it's like they chose to work there, and if they want better conditions, I think what they should do is unionize and and potentially strike in order to achieve better outcomes. So I will say absolutely disagree to this one. The filling and storage of potential records should be delimited strictly, and that databases cross-checking should be forbidden. Uh, well, I believe in I believe in surveillance to some extent, and I think that we already have surveillance. The NSA, for example, in the United States, has been able through its surveillance to deter many risks, like security risks, like in terms of terrorism, through surveilling individuals and catching people before they do serious harm to others. So I do think that surveillance is useful in terms of deterring crime and acts of terrorism. And for that, you need a certain level of personal record keeping, and you need, to some extent, also maybe database cross checking. I believe, like Voldemort, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And many people critique me for that, because they're like, oh, like this will just lead to Orwell's books, like is it 1948? It's called, where you have like this very type of authoritarian governments. But I don't think that I would say that most of the West, the states in the West, have surveillance, and and like we don't have that type of authoritarian regime, and that form of authoritarian regime, if it first came about, would install that type of surveillance anyway. And so I don't think that it really does any harm to have that level of surveillance. Of course, it is misused, but if you have a regime in a country that would misuse such information, it would create a system so that it can misuse that information anyways. So I would rather disagree. It is important to encourage an agriculture that maintains food biodiversity even if the output is inferior. So I think that economic globalism, which has been the state of affairs for certainly a very long time, has been beneficial to many countries, where certain countries that are good at producing certain things, like wheat or rice, can do so, and produce it in large quanta. And it is far more efficient when you have economies that are specialized at certain things, rather than having an economy trying to produce everything under the sun. But recently, we have seen that countries have moved closer and closer to economic protectionism. Like you see this with more and more sanctions, an encouragement of building more and more industry in the countries, like with Biden and the wind turbines that is saying should be built in Detroit, I believe it was. And most countries, for the most part, have farm subsidies already to make sure that if, for example, there's a shortage in the global market, they will be able to feed their population to some extent, because anything can happen. Like you can have, for example, a country that is responsible for a lot of the food production. For example, Ukraine has been traditionally one of the largest producers of wheat. And during the invasion of Ukraine, that has been tempered with, like they're not able to produce the same levels as they were before the invasion. And so when crises like that occurs in the global market, I think definitely your country has to be prepared for that. And so I absolutely agree with that. Yes. Hello. Hi. No one should get rich from owning businesses, housing, or land. Well, I think that housing is what I consider problematic here. Um, it's been the case recently in many countries in the West and the rest of the world that an increasing amount of the population rents housing, and a decreasing amount of the population owns. And one of the most important things for intergenerational wealth growth is owning your own property. And so I think that the development in terms of housing is highly problematic. Like I think it's desirable for everyone to own their own property. Um, and I think that there probably should be regulation in place to make sure that um, either um, more housing is built so that housing is more accessible, or that the housing that exists um, can't just all be bought up by investment firms that essentially creates artificial scarcity in the market and just buys up all of this property to inflate the prices of housing. That seems highly problematic to me because, if you're going to start a family, um, like one of the most important things is to own a house, and to have a car and to have a job. And it's become increasingly hard for young people in our society to essentially achieve these things and have access to housing and a career and all of these things. I believe in my country of Norway, the youth unemployment rate is around 20%. And it's similarly in many of the countries in the West. The unemployment rate is tremendously high amongst young people, um, and that doesn't create a for a stable society. That these are some of the reasons why we're having many of these massive demographic problems with aging population, because it is harder for young people today to start a family than it was 50 years ago. Um, and so if we fixed some of these economic problems, I definitely think that it would be easier to have a sustainable society. And the society that we have now is definitely not sustainable. And you can see that from the demographic changes, where most of the population today, I think, is between 30 and 50, and there is increasingly fewer young people in the society. Um, however, have no problem whatsoever with people getting rich from owning a business or from working their land. Like, let's say that you're a farmer, for example. Like, I think that that is something that is valuable, and that also goes back kind of to the earlier question, that you need food production in a society because you don't know when scarcity is going to arrive in the market. Um, and so I would say that I find it perfectly fine if someone gets rich from owning a business or owning land. The only problem I find here is if someone gets rich from owning housing, because, as I said, the housing market has essentially just been artificially inflated, and you have these investment firms increasingly buying up property, um, so that it's harder and harder for young people to have access to that property. So um, I guess I will say rather disagree. Marriage should be abolished. I don't see any reason why marriage should be abolished. I do think that um, you can make the same argument for land. Sure, like you want to talk about that? We could have a conversation about that if you want. Let's see. Let's see if I can't find. Where's. Give me 1 second. I can invite you to my server. Let's see. There it is. If you would like to, what is it that that you mean exactly? Isn't land also important for generational wealth? Well, it probably depends on where you live, but like I think as long as you have property, that is fine. Like most people today aren't like farmers, for example, right? So most people aren't really using land for anything. I don't know. I'm from Norway, so in Norway, about 3% of the land is arable land, and there's a lot of wilderness and you know, nature that could be used by people and being moved into, but it's not. Of course, it's not suitable for farmland. For farmland, you need fairly flat land, and also to clear the land, to clear all this land out in nature, you know, would take a tremendous amount of effort because the farmland that is farmland today has gone through a tremendous process of refinement. So you know, they've removed rocks, they've removed trees, they've done all of this. Like all of the farmland that you see in England today or Denmark and these countries didn't used to be farmland. It used to be forests and woods and stuff like that. And over a long periods of time, hundreds of years, it was made into very refined farmland. Sure, like I don't know. Many places I think that you can buy land in my country for fairly cheap. Some places in my country, like as long as it's not in the urban areas. In fact, like some municipalities literally gives housing away from free too. But the problem is that in those municipalities, there's essentially no jobs to be had. And so unless you have like an online job or engagement, then it's like very hard to live there and work there because there's no jobs to be had. Like one of the examples is like Hattfjelldal kommune. Right. So let's see. Maybe here. Like you can get these apartments, I think, for nothing, more or less, because these municipalities have a tremendous problem um, with like people moving out of them, and so you can live there for basically nothing. Um, the point with like property is that like if you own a house, right, or an apartment, then you don't have to pay rent constantly, right? And so it's a lot easier for you to acquire wealth because you don't have the same level of constant expenses, right? So I wouldn't say that land is equally important to acquiring like generational wealth as property. I wouldn't. Maybe if you would care to elaborate, I could respond to that. Let's move on. Yeah, marriage should be abolished. Um, I don't really see any reason for marriage to be abolished, but I also think that the institution as it exists today has like a very diminished societal purpose. So I think that marriage, what marriage traditionally was essentially you're tied to someone in perpetuity. This is someone you're going to spend the rest of your life with. And with many different societal changes, and then when you spend the rest of your life with them, you're supposed to start a family. Like marriage is an institution of the family. Today, there's not really as much of a social expectation of you to start a family when you get married, and also like divorce is rampant. Like in some countries like Portugal, I think the divorce rate is higher than 90%, right? And so that sanctity of marriage, and I'm not like a Christian person or anything, has like completely vanished. And so the institution is much more meaningless today than it was before. It's just something that a bunch of lawyers, essentially earn money off, because when you divorce, you have to pay them a hefty sum settlement, essentially to get divorced. I don't agree that it should be abolished, but I do think that the institution is greatly diminished. People need to stand up for their ideals, even if it leads them to betray their country. So, if my country was communist, for example, I would probably not fight for my country because I don't really identify ideologically with communism. And so I think that people do that anyway. Of course, I think it's great to be patriotic. But why fight for a country that you have no stake in, right? If I didn't identify with my country, I would have a very hard time fighting for it. And I think that's also one of the reasons why you see that, for example, the U.S. Army has a massive problem with getting new recruits. And I think that is because, essentially, U.S. Army has a problem with recruits, right? It's much harder, I think, to get, or there's much fewer people that recruit or volunteer to join the army today than there were 50 years ago, for example. And that is because people today that live in America feel less ideologically aligned with the United States. Yeah, I somewhat agree with that. Order and authority should be respected in all circumstances. I think that many times, an authority can be corrupted and make you do despicable things. Like you can only look at the Germans in World War II for that. So I think that if a government wants you to do great atrocities against humanity, essentially, then it is more beneficial if you go against that society and against that system, because if people continuously refuse it, then it can't really continue. But for like the German soldiers in World War II, I know that, for example, there's stories where the Germans that rounded up and shot the Jews, they were like given a bottle of fine whiskey, right? And so there were people, many of these soldiers, that said no initially, right, to rounding up and shooting the Jews, and then the other ones came back and they're like, I got my bottle of whiskey, and they would drink it and have fun, and they were essentially socially coerced over time, because of the social pressure in their unit and in their troop, to commit these acts of murder over time, and so saying no to committing acts of violence. Like many people think that, it's easy, like I would be noble, I would never serve Hitler if I was in Germany, but everyone is a product of their society. That's why you see people in Serbia support Russia. That's why you see people in my country, Norway, support Ukraine, because we're a product of the media and the circumstances within our society. And so I think it's much, much harder to say no to order and authority, than people think. But yeah, no, when that authority is tyrannical, I wish that people would say no, but it doesn't seem to be so simple. So I will put rather disagree. Selfishness is the overriding drive in the human species, no matter the context. I guess I agree with that. I think people are profit oriented, and after to help themselves. Of course, that you have like examples of people doing altruistic things that doesn't really concern them, like jumping off a bridge, to save a kid that they have no relation to. I guess a good example here is green-beard altruism, which is a thought experiment within evolutionary biology, which states that people altruism is only developed evolutionarily if altruists can recognize other altruists. And so you will have to have some type of kinship, or feeling of kinship, to someone in order to risk yourself to save them. In this experiment, altruists can see that other altruists are altruists through them having a green beard, and from one person having a green beard helping someone else with a green beard, those genes propagate because they're able to work with each other because they see that each other are altruists. If they couldn't see that, then they would potentially help someone that is not altruistic to them, or likely to show them the same courtesy. And so altruism in itself can be a very, very bad type of evolutionary, doesn't survive in evolution, generally speaking. It's not a good evolutionary strategy. It depends on what you mean, because people can absolutely endanger themselves to save someone else. But again, like in humans are social creatures. we're tribalist, and it has been beneficial for us to to help each other. That is how we have evolved as a species. Um, and so, like, when you see someone, a human, help another human, you could say that that is within a human's interest, because evolutionarily that has been beneficial. Um, so I guess I will agree within that context. Um, we should always distance ourselves from protesters who use violence. I think political violence is a horrific thing, and I wish that it was something that was never committed. I don't know. I don't really know if there's much more I can say about this. I just find, I guess, violence axiomatically to be bad. Of course, sometimes you do have to commit acts of violence. Like, if you're never willing to do violence, you're probably never going to be able to protect your ideas. But then I'm talking about, like, violence in terms of war, for example. Like, if Ukrainians weren't willing to shoot Russians, they wouldn't be able to preserve their country or their nation. And so you have to be willing to commit some acts of violence if you're going to protect your ideals. Um, so I will absolutely agree that we should, you know, distance ourselves from violence. I don't like political violence, especially. Um, but then again, like, some violence is necessary. Like, we don't live in an unviolent world as much as we would like for that to be the case. I don't know what this means. I'm gonna look it up. What? We should be. Oh, retiring. Okay. We should be retiring earlier. Um. That's my fucking dyslexia acting up. Not that I'm dyslexic, but it fucking seems like it. Um. So. Um. I think that it is something that's going to be problematic, especially for our generation, because I don't think that our generation, or people that are young now, will have the same ability to retire as someone else. And I would definitely encourage everyone to not pay into a pension plan, because these pension schemes and a lot of these welfare schemes that are set up around pensioners, they will falter. They're already under tremendous strain, and even in countries like mine, like in Norway, that has, like, one of the largest sovereign investment funds in the world. Like, our minister of labor and inclusion has essentially said that the average pension in the future will be smaller than the smallest pension today. Um, and when we have an increasing amount of old people, we will be able to produce less, and we will be able to provide less for the old people within our society. And so I'm not sure if it's possible any longer, no matter how much I wish it was possible for people to retire earlier. I don't think that that is politically possible, um, because we are going to produce less. And if everyone retire earlier, then people will suffer, because there will be a lack of medicine, lack of food, and lack of every other commodity you could think of. Um, and so I have to say I absolutely disagree. Um, the main goal of a couple is to make at least one child. Well, I traditionally that is definitely the case. Although I do think that people are together for all manner of different reasons, like enjoying each other's company, sexual intercourse, and so on and so forth. I wouldn't say that um, you know, uh, people have to have children. But I do think it's desirable in society that people have children. I think that one of the major reasons why the West is in collapse is because of the declining birth rates. Because this will lead to virtually all the social welfare programs that exist in the West, whether that be universal education, universal healthcare, all of these different systems will collapse because there will be such a tremendous strain on the system from all the old people that will take out a great deal of the system without contributing much. I do think that I have a graph for this. Um, let's see. Yes, here it is. This one. So this is the graph in Norway. So in Norway, between 0 and 20, you're a cost to the state. Of course, the state pays for your education and so on. You don't necessarily have a job, and so you don't pay many taxes. Whilst when from where you're like 25 to when you're 60, the state benefits from you. And when you're like 70 to 100, you're a huge financial burden for the state. And so when most of your population is over here, where they're a financial burden to the state, it is evident that these systems will collapse and no longer be essentially maintainable. Um, so, yeah. Um, so I will have to say that I agree because I wish for more people in society to have children. Um, and I think that that is important to maintain society. Otherwise, we will have a complete systems collapse. The values of my country are superior to those of other countries. So I'm a moral, I'm a cultural relativist. So I don't think that any culture is superior to any other culture, but I am emotionally invested in my culture, and so I feel like my culture is superior because that is the culture that I grew up with, that I am a part of, and which I would like to give to my kids and my grandkids. And so I do think like I definitely prefer Norwegian culture to like Arabic culture, for example, Saudi Arabian culture, which until like 2016 didn't allow for women to drive, and have this very restrictive framework where people aren't allowed to do very many things. Like they have to clearly fit into these categories. There's like if you're a woman, you can only do certain things. If you're a man, you can only do certain things. And I guess I believe in liberal values and my cultural traditions much more than I believe in those cultural traditions. And so just like subjectively from my own heart and my own feelings regarding this, I feel that my country's values are superior, which is of course completely subjective. um, a language is defined by its users, not by scholars. um, yes and no. So, for example, if you read a study, right, You read a study in sociology, or you read a study in behavioral genetics. Um, a sociologist might mean something entirely different when saying something like heritability than someone that is behavioral geneticist. Um, because the sociologists, generally speaking, believe that things are socially constructed, and they also believe that things are hereditary through social construction. Like, if I socially construct my child in a certain way, then you can say that that is hereditary because that is passed down to them from me. But a behavioral geneticist would say that no, what is hereditary is just like what is genetic, right? And so, like, when you read like different studies, like, it's important to pick up that like different scholars means different things by different definitions. But like, generally speaking, when language is used, like when you write a paper, you can define a word to mean whatever you want. But generally speaking, the way language is used, what it means commonly, is defined by its users. So I will absolutely agree. The maximum allowed hours in the legal work week should be increased. Um, yeah. If someone wants to work more, I do not see a problem with them working more. I think that people should be able to work as much as they want to. Of course, like, the problem is that I don't think it should be expected by companies that anyone works more than 8 hours of a day. That shouldn't be expected by a company. Because for some people like myself, like, I'm a fucking lazy piece of shit, right? That's why I'm here on Twitch. Um, you know, um, it would be very hard for me to work more than 8 hours a day. But for someone else, it might be desirable for them to work more than 8 hours a day, and they might very well have the capacity to work 10, 12 hours or even more a day. One of my best friends, he worked a full time job, a part time job, and he took his master's degree all at the same time. So he has clearly a much higher capacity for working than I have, and I don't really see any reason why he should be limited in taking more work if that's what he feels like. So I don't think that there should be any legal restrictions for how much you can work, but I don't think that employers should be able to increase someone's workload without their consent beyond 8 hours. And some people might even need specialization beyond that, and might need, a 4 hour workday, because there are people that have, for example, disabilities or different mental disorders, and so they might need a lesser workload because they have anxiety or something, and they're not able to talk to people for 8 hours of a day. Um, so I absolutely agree. Exploitation of fossil fuels is necessary. Um, I do think that it's very hard to make a full transition towards electric, and then it's also like, well, when you're going over to electric, like Germany, for example, recently shut down, I think, all their nuclear reactors, and so they're and so most of the power that you get from the electrical grid is essentially coal power, right? And so, you know, uh, going over to an electric vehicle might not be any better for the environment than using a fossil fueled car. Um, so if we're going to make a transition towards electric vehicles and electrical, we need to massively up our production of like nuclear energy, solar energy, or wind energy. And like these forms of energy have like each their challenges, and each their problems. So, for example, there are people that feel like nuclear energy is a legitimate security threat because some terrorist or someone might come in to the country and essentially take the nuclear plant hostage and make a nuclear bomb of the nuclear reactor that is essentially the same as Chernobyl, right? And then wind energy, I don't really particularly like wind energy because it kills a lot of birds, it kills a lot of wildlife, um, and like in Norway we have these Inuits that's called the Sami. And there was actually they actually sued the Norwegian government over human rights abuse because the Norwegian government had put up these wind turbines, um, in their kind of nomadic area where they were herding reindeer. Um, and so when you have, for example, indigenous people and stuff like that that have certain traditions, these wind turbines can create many problems for them, and many problems for kind of pasture farming and the animals that you have within this type of environments where these wind farms are put up. Um, and then I live in Norway, and so uh, solar energy is probably not a solution for Norway either, because it's fucking dark half of the year. So I would say that the exploitation of fossil fuels is necessary, unless we massively increase our nuclear production of nuclear energy, which I really see as the best alternative. Um, so I will absolutely agree. It is acceptable that some industry sectors are private. I agree with that. I even think that some sectors being private is desirable. Um, like I think that, for example, if you had everything kind of being looked down upon by the state, um, I think that that is far less desirable, because um, you know a state monopoly will essentially not challenge itself. For example, let's say you have a state Walmart, right? That state Walmart doesn't necessarily have any reason to evolve to become a state Amazon, where you have more efficient delivery. And so, when you have a planned economy where every sector of that economy is government enterprise, there's far less likely that there's innovation, because whatever institute you have of like commerce is very unlikely to challenge itself and to innovate. And I think that that is something that the private market does far better. Of course, there are also industries that it is desirable to be owned by the government, like, for example, healthcare and education. Um, so I will say absolutely agree. A good citizen is a patriot. Well, it seems to me that it is important that people have some amount of um, identification with the state they are a part of. Otherwise, they're not really likely to partake in that state, or, for example, pay taxes, or be an active member of that state. So again, I'll take up the example with South Africa. When you have a lot of people that don't really identify with the state, it's far more likely that they will do things like tax evasion. Again, the shadow economy of South Africa is 35%, I believe it is, or 30 to 40%. And then you have less revenue that the government can essentially seize and use for the common good, because people don't identify with the state. And so a state is way better functioning when people actually identify with the state and they want to work for the purposes of the state. People don't identify with the state, they're not very likely to sacrifice for the state in terms of, for example, becoming a soldier for the state, or in terms of paying taxes to the state. Why would you pay taxes to a state you don't identify with? Like, if you think you can get away with it. So I will agree with that. Abortion should be limited to specific cases. I don't know. I guess that depends on how specific we're talking about. I think I think that abortion should be a right that everyone has access to. But I don't. I think that if someone wants an abortion, that should be challenged, because I don't think that it's a desirable thing. For there to be as many abortions as possible within a country or within a state. I think you really want to minimize the amount of abortions. Of course, you don't want anyone to have a child against their will. And if they're forced to have a child against their will, that can cause a really toxic relationship where, the mother really resents the child. So I knew a story about a woman that was training to be an astronaut, and then she became pregnant. And she either had to give up the dream of essentially becoming an astronaut, or have the child. And if I would totally understand if she had, an abortion in order to pursue her dream of being an astronaut. Of course, she chose to save the child, but if you have to give up on your dreams because you're forced to carry a child to term, I think that can create a really resentful and toxic parent-child relationship. So I think that abortion should be allowed. It shouldn't be limited, but at the same time, you can make someone aware of other alternatives. For example, you can tell them, well, you don't even have to take care of the child. If that the issue is with money or something, you can be like, we put the child up in foster care, or we will give them adoptive parents. There is enough adoptive parents or people that want to adopt children in the West. Like, in fact, we import adopted babies from other countries because there's not enough of a domestic supply of kind of children put up for adoption. And so I think that if someone wants an abortion, they should someone should come in and kind of question that to try to deter that from happening. So I guess I will put rather disagree. Reduction of waste should be done by reducing production. Well, I do think I do think that that depends on your circumstances. I think that in my country, for example, we have enough resources to maintain our population, and in fact increase our population. Um, like if you're going to reduce production, you're ultimately going to reduce living standards, right? And I don't think that there's anyone that wants reduced living standards. Like who would be willing to take that bullet, right? Um, that like that yeah, I'm gonna live in a container, but at least there's less waste. Um, I don't really think that I don't really know to which extent there is a problem with waste. Um, I do think that the waste poured into our oceans is quite problematic. Um, so I guess I will put. Uh, I, I, I disagree to some extent. Well, you do have do have things like planned obsolescence, for example, where things are planned to not last. So that, for example, the first light bulbs that were made, um, many of them still work today because um, because they were made to last. And things that are made today are not made to last. So you could massively reduce reduce waste just by making things to last, um, which of course would reduce production, which is like a massive economic issue as well, because then there will be less people that are employed. Um, like yeah, there's a reason why they made light bulbs only to last around 1,000 hours, and that's because that way they could make new light bulbs. And when there's lesser need to make new light bulbs, there's fewer people working in a light bulb factory. So you might have massive problems with unemployment, of course, if you reduce the level of production. Um, so it is a really difficult problem. I do think that we should probably produce more, maybe, or produce less. I mean, or at least recycle. Make sure that the things that we produce are recyclable. That way, you can have the same level of production without that really impacting the level of waste. I do think that the amount of waste that exists in society, like in terms of dumps and stuff like that, has like heavily reduced over the last 50 years or so, because we have become much more efficient in recycling. So I think maybe that is the solution. The solution is to become more efficient in recycling. The police should be armed. Well, um, in my country there um, was a robbery of a bank. It's called Nukas, the Nukas robbery, and in that case, the police wasn't really armed, because police is not supposed to be armed unless, like, the the robbers are armed, and there was a policeman that died in this case, and I do think that the lives of our police that's doing important service to society is more important than the life of some criminal. Like if a criminal opens fire, the police should definitely be armed so that they can open fire back. At the same time, like for the most part, I believe in rehabilitation, but like there's so many cases of someone being like a legitimate danger to society and others, and in those cases it's definitely helpful for the police to be armed. So I agree. Energy and transportation structures should be a public matter. Well, if the private market can be more efficient than the government, I don't have any problem with these things being private. The problem with energy, of course, is that energy is like a net, what do you call it, a profit for the government, like the nuclear power plants or the hydro plants that we have here in Norway. Like the government benefits tremendously from the power that's generated in these hydro plants. And so I do believe that the energy sector, I guess, generally speaking, should be owned by the government, or the government should have a vested interest in the development of the energy sector. Because of course you can have like a partial private, partial government owned corporation. Like that is what you have a lot of the time. Like for example, Telenor, which is the ninth largest telecommunicom company in the world, is a Norwegian company, and it is 60% owned by the state, and it's 40% owned by the private market. And so I do think that there should probably be government interests in these things, but so it's like a private company that's partially owned by the government, and I think that these companies usually are efficient. But yeah, I do think that government should have a lot of involvement in the energy sector. Transport, however, like if we're talking about trains, trams, and buses, and so on and so forth, like these things are net loss to the government. And so if these things could be privatized and made affordable for the consumer, and more affordable for the government, I am all for it. And I do think that in terms of transport structures, by and large, they like many of these, for example, bus companies and stuff like that, are private, and it's essentially made into a bidding war where different private companies, they bid in order to be the private company that delivers the service. And so it's whichever private company that feels that they can deliver the service at cheapest gets the job. And in some sectors, I think that is efficient. I think in many sectors, I don't think so. That system is called new public management. In many sectors, I don't really think that new public management is efficient. But when it comes to transport, I believe that it might be. So I guess I will say somewhat agree on this. Members of a nation or culture have some unchangeable characteristics that define them. I don't think so. Like what Norway is, and who's a part of Norway is something that's changed drastically over you know the last 1,000 years. Like in the Viking Age, of course, people had much more of an honor culture, and you had like rampant dueling, and you had a lot of homicides and stuff like that. And so Norwegian culture used to be much more of an honor culture, for example, than it is today. Today, of course, like Norwegian culture is far less violent. Um, and if culture has some type of unchangeable characteristics, um, I don't know what they would be. Um, like that's really hard to say. So I guess I would say absolutely disagree. Sabotage is legitimate under certain conditions. Um, I don't think that sabotage is ever legitimate. What uh, what do you guys think? You guys think that sabotage is legitimate? No, I don't think that sabotage is ever legitimate. So I will just say absolutely disagree and move on to the next question. Individuals who get out of prison should be assisted in their uh, reinsertion. Yes, I absolutely agree with this. I think that the transition from prison life to real life in society can be hard. Like a lot of the time, companies are really averse to hiring people that are earlier uh, convicts. So like if you don't help these people get back to society, they will just commit crimes again, because they don't have much prospects for a job. They might not have like any contacts that can help them get a job, and might not have what they need to get by. And so what they go back to is like what they did earlier, which might be like slinging drugs or something, and then they're put back in prison in like 6 months time because they couldn't break out of the cycle. So you definitely have to be there in that phase where they they go back into society. Otherwise, they're just gonna commit the crimes again. Um, so I absolutely agree with that. Some sectors or type of employment should be financially supported. Yes, I agree with that. Again, I think a good example is the farming sector. Like virtually every country in the world has farming subsidies. So yes, I do think that sectors such as that is like essential for a country, um, should be financially supported. I am equally concerned about the inhabitants of my country and those of other countries. Um, well, not really. Like, if someone is shot down the street from where I live, I will be a lot more shocked than if if someone dies in Ghana, right? Then it's too far away for me to feel any personal attachment to the people that die there. If someone dies in my neighborhood, I'm gonna feel a great deal of concern with that. And so I absolutely disagree. I feel a great deal more concern about like the people in my neighborhood and in my country than those that are halfway across the world. I do believe uh, euthanasia. Euthanasia. So that's assisted suicide, right? Um, yeah, I do believe that euthanasia should be authorized. Like if someone is suffering and they're about to die of cancer, which is a terrible death, right? I don't really see any reason why um, why they shouldn't be allowed to pass. Like that seems inhumane to me. That you just let them keep on with their suffering on chemo and so on and so forth. So if someone has a serious illness and it's known that this is going to be painful for them, if someone is very old and frail, I don't really see any problems with euthanasia. And a lot of the time, euthanasia can be better than just dying randomly because you can gather all your loved ones, all your friends, and talk to them as you pass on. They can be there in your final moments. Whilst death, normally speaking, is like it's a lonely thing. You die, and there might not even be anyone there to observe it, and you die alone without being able to say your final goodbyes. When you know when it's gonna happen, at least you can say your final goodbyes. Um, so I absolutely believe that euthanasia should be illegal. Revolutions will always end up in a bad way. I do think that I do think that when a revolution occurs, um, there is a bunch of collateral. So, for example, during the Russian Revolution, for example, you had massive purges, massive amounts of the population. The same goes for the French Revolution. You had massive purges um, of the population, um, and so you know I don't really think that that is desirable. That massive subsets of the population is killed, and at the end of the revolution, what you're left with um, might um, might not be any better than what you started off with, right? You might be left with someone that's just as cruel and just as incompetent as the rulers that existed before the revolution took place. Um, Although, like when it comes to like the Soviet Union and stuff like that, I will say that the leadership that took control after after the revolution were more competent to some extent, because um, unlike the Tsar Nicholas, which was kind of averse to industrialization and and different societal changes, the Bolsheviks, you know, um, essentially made mass industrialization in the Soviet Union happen. Uh, and because of that, the lives of the average citizens in the USSR, increased over time. Of course, like it was bad a long time too. Don't get me wrong, with a lot of starvation and stuff like that. But over time, they industrialized, and life became better than under Tsar Nicholas. Um, so I will put somewhat agree. Nowadays, employees are free to choose when signing a contract with their future employer. So, I'm sure many people would say that, like, oh, people don't really have a choice. Like they have to live, right? Um, like living isn't free. So, like sometimes, uh, like if you have to work at McDonald's, that is probably not you want to do, but you uh, signed that contract, and I guess people would say that, well, if you sign a contract out of necessity because you don't want to die, right? Then you're not really free in the choice of signing that contract. Um, and I guess you could say that that is a certain level of coercion. Um, but I do think that, like, of course, this depends from society to society. Um, I think in Norway, I think by and large, people do have that freedom. I don't think that people have to take a job that they really, really, really don't want to take. Sure, the job that they're taking might not be ideal for them, um, but um, it's not like the job is the worst thing that they can imagine themselves. Um, um, so it really depends on the context of what country you're talking about. Like if you're in a country with no social safety net whatsoever, um, yeah, I think that you might not be free at all to actually choose where you want to work, because if you don't take this job, you will starve, or you will not have a roof over your head, right? Um, so I because of me living in Norway, I will say somewhat agree, but I think that it really really depends on like your circumstances. My religion must be spread as widely as possible. Well, I'm agnostic, and I'm also a Norse pagan. I'm a part of a Norse pagan organization called Forn Sed Norge. Um, and I don't know. It's not like I really believe in it, but I think that that is like a continuation of my ancestors' belief and my culture, which is why I am there. And so um, I don't really feel any need whatsoever to spread my religion as widely as possible. Um, of course, I would like for more people to believe in Norse paganism, I guess, or like not believe but partake in the traditions and so yeah, I will say neutral or hesitant. Biologically, human beings are meant for heterosexuality. Well, I will say that homosexuality is certainly a bad evolutionary strategy, right? Because you're not passing on your genes and so on and so forth. But if it was biologically impossible for someone to be homosexual, there would not be anyone that's homosexual, right? Um, so I guess I will say rather disagree. So I think I've been streaming for 2 hours now. Um, So I think I will end it off here for now, and then I will come back maybe later today and continue this. Anyone have questions uh, before I leave? All right. Well, I wish you all a good day. Have a nice one.